Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome North Carolina Board of Transportation member and retired General Hugh Overholt.
Good afternoon. I have the pleasure of being with this panel this afternoon. I've been with them for the last 30 minutes, and I am absolutely and completely convinced that they're so much smarter than I am that I'm not going to have to talk very much today. I hope you've had a good first day here. Then I do have one observation that I made sitting out in the audience on the first speaker this morning. I thought he was dynamic, don't you all? But I had one question on that second slide he showed, where you showed the horses and then the cars, and there was one horse left. I wonder what happened to that horse. I mean, did he go to Delmonico's? We're going to have an important session, as I mentioned. And if we were at Heber Springs, Arkansas 70 years ago, and I was there, we would not have had an auditorium, of course. We wouldn't have had any electricity, and we would have had dirt roads. And if someone had asked to take your device out, you would have had to take a Blue Horse notebook and a number 2 pencil. But today we are past that, and please take out your communication devices, and we're going to put some pictures up on the screen here for you. And please take that survey, answer those questions, and then we'll get back to them later. You can also participate through social media by using the hashtag number NCTRANSPO 2020. I would not know how to do that, but I hope that you can. This afternoon, we're going to have several experts who are going to join us in discussing how data collected and utilized in this era of connected and autonomous vehicles and smart cities. And we've got a really great panel for you. We have Eric Boyette, who grew up as a DOT person, is now the State Director of North Carolina Department of Technology. And T.J. Costello, Global Director for Cities, Communities, and Transportation for Cisco. And Venkat Mattapalli is a Business Development and Culture Manager for Amazon Web Services. Later in this session, we will afford you some time to talk to these experts. And now then, please give Eric Boyette a warm welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
I'll take this with me. That's all right.
You don't want me to use your notes?
No, I'll go over here.
So, thank you, Hugh, and thank you, everyone, for this afternoon. I know everyone wanted me to come talk about IT procurement. And no, maybe not. Bad joke. More than anything, as Hugh mentioned, I would, if you think about what we're here to talk about today, and if you look around the room when Hugh asked for you to take out your device, I'd love to see how many of you do not have one of these in your hands. In today's society, we all have these devices. It's part of our life. It's part of what we do, and it's a good way to be connected. But if you look at, if you talk about technology and you talk about how we're connected more than ever. We're always connected in some way. And every person has one of these phones. And what can you do with it? You can do many different things. You can shop online. You can do music. You actually can now, when you need to go anywhere, you don't ask people for directions. You just ask for an address. You got navigation systems. So there's so many different things we use our devices for, and we don't have dictionaries and encyclopedias. You have Siri, you have Alexa, you have devices that you ask questions of, and then they give you the answers. I think it's getting a little easier. I'm not sure. I know my kids, I'm still making them use books. I try to find them. But it's something in today's world that we're very connected, and we have a lot of data out there. And, if you think about it, think about if you're headed to work and you don't want to drive, so what do? You can call a Lyft, you can call an Uber. And for years, I know that's another oddity, for years I've been told you don't get in the car with strangers. What do? A stranger pulls up and we jump in the car with them. But along the way, our devices are saying to us as we're traveling, you may pass your favorite coffee shop. Or it may remind you, you've got dry clean to pick up. But what do? We continue to work because we don't want to be late to work. But it's always connected. Our emails, social media, there's several different things that we have available. Podcast. Many of you are listening to podcasts, more information that we're gathering, more information that we're sharing. And as autonomous and connected vehicles work, we're continuing to take all this massive amounts of data and transfer. And our preferences on what you listen to and what you repeat and what you say and who you're texting and who you're calling is all being stored. But if you look at that infrastructure and what's needed, there's several ways that data has to be connected, and to make sure all of that takes, multiple computer systems, multiple networks, and just a lot of that seamless flow of communication that has to be there and has to be available. But these new technologies, have great potential, to help us with saving lives, but they also have the potential of being disruptive if the wrong person has the ability and grabs our data. So with that, I want to talk about cybersecurity. As the state CIO, one of our top priorities in our agency is cybersecurity. And it's also, I serve as the president for our National Association of State CIOs, and it's also one of our top priorities for all of our states. It's been a top priority over the past 5 years, and over the last 10 years, it's been in our top 10 of our priority listing. It goes beyond secure, passwords and firewalls today. We have more cyber criminals they're smarter. They're trying to stay ahead of us, and we're trying to make sure that we're defending the state's data and also our state network. And how do we work together with our private partnerships that we have? But they're relentless. If, I didn't put the slide up here about the number of attacks that we see daily, but they're multiple. And it's very, very, very frustrating for us to make sure we have dedicated staff just to protect. So we got to make sure we do that. But it is a number one concern for us. But it's also not just an IT concern. Just because we're IT professionals, it's not just our concern. It's all of our concerns. So we got to make sure that as these new technologies with autonomous vehicles, with connected vehicles, as they are deployed, what does that look like? How do we make sure that we are educating and we are helping our consumers understand that these vehicles are safe, that our auto industry, our partners are really making sure that they're, just as we have to do with our hardware, we're providing updates to software. They're doing the same thing for our autonomous vehicles, and it helps with that adoption rate. And I think including and making sure we do that is part of our job. But if you look at consumer education, it is important. But we've got to make sure that the people understand the risks that they're taking with these vehicles, but also the reward. So how do we balance that, and what do we do to help with that? But if you look at, maybe we do, privacy checklists. So if you're getting ready to sell a vehicle, what does that mean? Do I just sell it like I normally would an older vehicle that is not autonomous or not connected? You've got things as simple as, your garage remote. How do I deprogram that? I've got to make sure when I sell that vehicle that nobody can drive up to my house and come into my house. The other thing is your GPS, your navigation tool. You're erasing your points of interest. You're erasing your actual home address out of that. So these things are things I think we can really work to do to make sure we help with that adoption rate. And last, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about our workforce for cybersecurity. We have to invest in our cybersecurity workforce. We are at a point where we are suffering across our nation with a shortfall. We don't have enough professionals to perform the work that we need. So we're working hand in hand on new ways to do that with partnerships with our community colleges. We're working with our private industry. How do we work there? They're seeing the same uptick in need and downtick in resources. So we're really working to see how do we do that, and what can we do, and what does that gap look like, and how do we close that gap. But As I mentioned, it is a public and a private issue, a public partnership that we have, that we're working towards. And you'll hear it today from my private industry partners that are coming up. They have the same issues, but we're all working together to make sure that we can create a safe environment for these vehicles. And if you look on that graphic, it's amazing to me to see how many different things store our data. And it's not just your music. It's not your favorite list. It's everything. So with that, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you. That's good. Next, I'd like to welcome T.J. Costello, who is with Cisco, and I think you're going to enjoy what he has to say, and have your questions ready for him because he has been around the world. T.J., good to see you.
Thank you for that warm introduction. So I'm not last, which I'm pretty happy about. No, I'm just kidding. First, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm a little disappointed I wasn't the person that got to ride in the air taxi yesterday, but no one else would have fit with me, so that's probably good. I thought I'd take a few minutes. I have the luxury of going around the world and kind of, I like being in transportation. I can tell you, being in technology. Right now, we're in this incredible age of transformation. You know, what I tell people is, you know, there's never been a time like this, probably other than when we went to the automobile or the airplane. We work with customers all over the world, and they're talking about automated ships coming into a port, automated trains, automated air taxis, cars, and the list is endless. And I always get asked is, what are people using the data for, or what's driving them? And they fit in themes, and each driver is different. So, for example, in the Port of Rotterdam, what they wanted to be able to do was, their port is a big part of their economy. They wanted to add sensors into the waterway so that they could see more of the water. It goes up and down with the tide and has salinity in it. And what it meant for them is, when they could start to use more of that water and make themselves more attractive and bring more ships in on a schedule safely, even though there was less water than they used to before they had sensors. That helps create jobs, and it helps get them ready for the future. Now they're beginning to invest in a digital infrastructure to get ready for automated ships. We have a major city here in the US who started to had some issues and got some complaints from citizens about near misses of pedestrians. They've had a couple pedestrians get killed, and several had near misses. And the city had no visibility into what that was, so they wanted to put up a sensor at an intersection and along a roadway to begin to understand what was driving the near misses. And what they came to learn over time was that there was a housing project and there was a grocery store. And it was a 5 or 6 lane road. And what was happening is people were just crossing in the middle of the block. Well, the answer to that and the solution wasn't technology, it was a crosswalk, right? So better urban planning as a result of data, safety for the citizen. And what was interesting, one of the unintended consequences is what they took the data also was for economic development. What they learned while they were trying to look at the safety problem, because they owned the data, when they is in economic development, they got to realize there were a lot more people in this end of town walking around, and they could market that from a development and economic perspective. Additionally, it's interesting to see customers when they're going down the path. There's a major US city out west where they got started and they wanted to increase ridership. Well, they had to make their buses more available. They had to make for a better passenger experience. So they connected up all of their buses, about 1,000 buses. And they wanted to make sure the engine was right, the oil, the tire pressure. They wanted to provide some Wi-Fi for the passengers. They wanted to make it easier for people to tap on versus having to pay. And ridership went up. And they got started. They were very excited, very successful project. And then along, several years went by, their population growth continued. Along came Uber and Lyft and scooters, and their roads were clogged. And what they realized is, yes, they had a successful project. They were able to get data off of a bus. They were able to provide a better service, but they needed a whole strategic lens on all of the infrastructure across all modes of transportation to make for a better citizen experience, and had to step back and come up with that plan. And I'll tell you, I'm pretty excited by working with the state of North Carolina. You guys are working, you have people working for you that are doing that, are thinking through this at a holistic level so that they're not just making one aspect of the journey better. Finally, the other part of this that I often get asked is, well, does this mean all this, that there's going to be no jobs in the future and all this automation? No, and it's interesting. One of the big jobs that we're seeing all pop up all over the globe is that of a data scientist, right? So who would have thought 10 years ago you'd have a data scientist as a core element of every job? It's a new job. Another job that's coming up is policy around data. So there are jobs around governance and data policies following some of the NIST frameworks. And next week at the Transportation Research Board annual event, more than half of the sessions of this major conference are all around data governance. Those things weren't happening. And that's what's taking place in the industry. They're using data to make services better, to drive the economy. They're using them to make roads safer for you all and make for a better experience, and also for all of us to be able to create some jobs. And I look forward, thank you very much, and I look forward to the further discussion.
Good job. Thank you very much, TJ. And next, I want to introduce Burkhat Maddipalli. But there's something personally I want to say. Burkhat, come on out here. We found out we had something in common, and that is we were both stationed with the 101st Airborne Division. So this is a veteran and a West Point graduate. So obviously a smart man.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Ian. First of all, I assume there's some Panthers fans out here, so congratulations on getting Rhule as your coach. Like, that's a serious thing. I don't know how you got him away from Baylor there, but besides football, you know, we're talking about autonomous and connected vehicles. We're talking about a connected ecosystem of devices, of sensors, of networks, of a ton of data that's just out there that needs to be collected and collated and analyzed. But then once you've analyzed it, you've got to figure out a way to manage it. And once you figure out a way to manage it, you've got to do something about it, right? So like getting to actionable intelligence from just a massive amount of data isn't just becoming a data scientist, right? It's creating the infrastructure within your community, within your city, your county, and your state that's able to do this for you, and do this at in a cost-effective way. And that's where the cloud comes in. So, as you mentioned, I work for Amazon Web Services. We work for state and local governments in the United States. And the autonomous and connected vehicle and system ecosystem of technology is part of my bailiwick. And so what the cloud can do for you in general there is help that holistic system of management that TJ was talking about, right? Because there's a ton of innovation out there that's been happening over the past 10 years in the field of transportation. And it's not just vehicles, right? It's QuickPass, it's cameras, it's traffic light sensors, it's passenger detectors to moderate the flow of pedestrian and vehicle traffic. All kinds of things like this that all create vastly different data streams at vastly different velocities, at vastly different types of variety. And all of these things require a serious infrastructure to both collect it and then create something useful out of it. So you can build your own, and there's a ton of expertise in this room that I bet can. But the advantage to the cloud, the advantage to the AWS cloud, is we take that undifferentiated heavy lifting of managing that IT infrastructure away from you, so you can focus your resources, not just financial resources, but the expertise that you have on building cool new things, right? Building the air taxi. I don't know what the air taxi he was talking about was. I guess I missed that, but like I'm sad I missed that. But we make building the air taxi easier, right? We give you the agility that you need. We give you the elasticity that you need. And more importantly, we give you the ability to go community-wide, to go citywide, statewide, in minutes, and only pay for and only use the resources that you need without the risk of, oh, I over-provisioned. It's going to sit here and not do anything. Now it's a massive capital artifact, right? With us, with the cloud, you can just spin up what resources you need, and when you find out you don't need them anymore, spin them right back down. So what that lets you do is connect to all of these various and massive data streams without telling the vendors that are giving you all of these data streams, without telling the builders that are creating all of these new types of information that they have to change the way that they're doing things. You don't have to go out and tell the guy that built the really cool passenger detection system in a major city, hey, you're saving lives, but we don't have the computing power available to make your data into something useful, so we need you to shoehorn it into this kind of system. All right? Using the cloud, you can focus the people that you have, the resources that you have, and the capabilities that you require, and put them into an infrastructure that is designed for the most security-conscious customers in the world. All right? Your customer data will never be accessed. Your customer data is protected the same way we've created it for those security-conscious customers. And now that you have that assurance and now that you have that confidence, you can focus on working with your employees and working with your vendors to make the really cool stuff. So for example, like you had the example of everyone's got the smartphone, right? And I'm pretty sure, I'd say 3/4 of you have smartwatches, I'd guess, right? Maybe half, maybe 3/4, something like that. There's probably a bunch of tablets in the room. Maybe someone has those, the Fitbits, obviously I don't have the Fitbit, but all of those things are transmitting some sort of data, right? All of those things are going to some sort of storage that whatever those vendors are using. All of those things are transmitted, whether it's location or your personal health data or, hey, this guy passed this store that day or this guy passed this highly congested intersection today. All of that storage now can come onto a cloud infrastructure that is fully secure, that is always private, that will always meet compliance requirements, and besides existing compliance requirements, will always be able to flex to meet whatever requirements you need in the future without putting the burden of that compliance on your state, on your communities, on your cities. So, like I said, my favorite example is the reason I work at Amazon Web Services, one of the biggest reasons is that I love books. I like reading a lot of books, and I love the Kindle, right? So I've like 2,100 books on Kindle. So I was interested in Amazon because of that, and everyone knows Amazon.com and all that. But when I started learning about Amazon in general, I started learning about AWS. And when I started learning about AWS, it's the platform for the Kindle. It's the thing that, hey, if you're using the Kindle app and you're looking at your library of 1,000 books, you see that the covers constantly update. You see when those ebooks are published and edited and pushed, they constantly update in real time on your Kindle, even though there's literally hundreds of millions of publications out there, all right? And the immediate connection to transportation here is real-time location data, real-time congestion data, travel planning. One of the biggest cities in the world has a holistic transportation system based on AWS where they combined, hey, not just the train planning, not just the street light planning, not just the congestions and the tolling. They took it all, combined it with their customer-facing applications across a variety of different vendors, different developers, different systems, and made a holistic offering to both their users, but also their employers, the guys that are making the trains run on time, right? And the way they were able to do that is take that burden of infrastructure away, put that burden of infrastructure in the cloud, put that burden of below the virtualization layer security in the cloud, put that burden of below the hypervisor security in the cloud, because that shared responsibility model where we can take that burden for you lets you focus on builders, lets you do cool things, lets you make me the flying car from the Jetsons, right? Thanks very much for having me, and I look forward to this conversation.
Hey, that was good. At this stage, the script says that Overholt leaves stage. Overholt has decided to stay on the stage. And we're going to have Eric Boyette, fortunately, to lead the discussion and just to follow. I may not have any answers, but I may have some questions. Eric, it's up to you.
Yes, sir. So I think the first thing we want to do is let's take a look at the poll and see how that transpired. Can we have that on the screen somewhere?
That's just their names.
I can't even see what they've got. There they are. I got to stand up. All right. So if you look, it's got what type of the personal information is being collected in self-driving cars. So the winner was all the above. Second would have been aggregated data. Third, non-sensitive data. And last was sensitive data. So I think with that, I'd like to hear from the panelists. TJ, I'm going to start with you. How do you feel about those results? What do you think that's in line, or?
I'm not surprised by the feedback. Right, I think we're all in an age where we are concerned, and we are seeing regulation and legislature begin to address that. Right, both in the U.S. and globally, and I think we're all excited about that. That there will be regulation in place to protect our privacy. But I think when we're talking about self-driving cars, if we're talking about when you as a DOT put down an infrastructure to have the cars communicate, there's two aspects. It's why do I need to do that? I like to think of it as an example as we've all been on the road driving behind a truck and we can't see around it, right? Even with a really smart, sophisticated car with all kinds of sensors, if they can't see around a truck, they probably have some of those same problems. And so, but if you've got a work zone ahead of you or you've got a traffic accident, you want to be able to communicate that, and you got to do that in some manner. So you've got to lay down some infrastructure for safety. Within the standards that exist around that communication, it's all anonymized. It doesn't know that it's TJ. It doesn't know that it's Eric. It might know who you are. I think we might have put you in the standard, but it's randomized, right? So it doesn't know whether you're driving a Ford or you're driving a Hyundai or a Ferrari. I don't drive, I know that. But all it wants to know is, did your traction control slip? Did your airbag slip? Are you moving at a rate of speed? Because I want to make sure the roadway is moving. And so they've taken the time to do that. Now, inside the car, that's an area that is evolving. And I think, you made me think of something today that, got rid of a car recently. And my old remote is probably still on there. And if I get robbed, I'm going to call you and say you told me so. But I can't really speak to the in the car, but I can speak to the good news is when it's communicating with the infrastructure and it comes across a government agency, it's anonymized data, and there's no way to know that it's you going to work every day, going across the bridge, and I think that's the best part about it.
Okay, Venkat, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, TJ, you make a good point. There's a lot of benefit to having community governments and having your transportation agencies have that anonymized data, because as long as it is anonymized and as long as you can put those structures in place to protect people, this is the data that's going to help build better roads. This is the data that's going to help put the highways in the right place or create the train routes and the bus routes and the public transportation routes that are going to get more citizens to more places they need to go. So having the data available is definitely positive, but we do understand that a challenge for guys like you is you've got to protect that data.
Right. Absolutely.
I agree.
We're good. So before I move to the next poll question, this show of hands, now that you took the poll before we all spoke, would any of you change your answers now? A few of you.
The answer is yes.
Okay. Let's see the second question. Dun, dun, dun. Personal information is being collected by self-driving car makers. That's the same question. Thank you. We go to question 2. We're having technical difficulties. Was there only one question? All right. Well, we're going to skip. They told me there was 3, so this is going to get fun. So what we'll do, we will move on. So if you think about the collaboration and partnership that, we mentioned about, public and private partnership and how do we work together, what do you see are, some of the key roles there that we work on together for this effort? So Venkat, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, so the reason I talked about that example about the very large city that, took a holistic approach to not just, the systems that its employees use internally, but the systems that it offers its customers, is that I really like that. I really like the idea that a public official, that a public agency has 2 sets of customers, right? So I come from the public sector. I used to be a public sector manager, and I definitely had the systems that I worked on with my employees that were our everyday, big enterprise, sometimes horrible things. But then the real goal was to get it to our end customers, right? The citizens. And so I think the most beneficial way to move forward between public agencies and private vendors is to, one, create ways like that where the public agencies have a system to manage all of the systems that they are using, but also make sure that all of their cool developers and vendors can do the cool things that they do without being stifled into a single, all right, you will use this enterprise system and you will use this format and we will have no innovation going forward. So that's what I encourage as we all go forward together. Make sure that we have that ecosystem of public sector developers and partners that are just trying to do really cool things, and then that we all work together so all of those cool things can be managed effectively for our government agencies.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a great point, because that's something that I know we're working on with Amazon and some other cloud providers for that, and open up the opportunity for our staff to be able to be creative, and the agency staff. So that's great. Same thing with Cisco. TJ?
Well, I mean, look, you have a great example here, and I'd go a little further. I think that air taxi is a perfect example of industry and government, right? So, do people want a better experience? Do they want to commute faster? Do they want innovation? Yes. But are they willing to sacrifice safety? No. Are the laws ready? Maybe not. So you've got to partner together where you're trying innovation. So you have to have a framework. You have to have a framework within government to be able to work on innovation, which may not all be successful. That one is probably going to be pretty successful given where the market is, but there are going to be some attempts at innovation that might not work. And then on the industry side, what it does make you realize is you've got to take the time to understand that sometimes the legislation has to catch up with it, right? Because the idea of a driver's license, we understand. We all have them. We've been using it. It's well understood. Well, who has the driver's license when there's no driver, right? So that means the legislation might have to catch up, and we've seen some states lean in and be the first to do that. So I think you've got to really work on it, and honestly, that's a terrific example of what you accomplished just yesterday. I think couldn't be a better one than I've seen.
How do we manage this technology in rural areas where I basically am from? How do we transport these ideas to Vanceboro, North Carolina?
Well, it's interesting. There are some people that believe that, so today, right, we're in the throes of the largest migration in human history, moving from rural areas into cities all across the world. Certainly in India and China and Africa in particular, and Asia in general, it's even more pronounced than you might see here in just North Carolina or in the U.S. in general. But there are some people that believe is when you can make the experience better, and the self-driving car affords you the opportunity to work the whole way in, you may be able to work back. And it's people want to live where they want to live, and if the experience in the commute is better, you can imagine a time. There are people that believe that it could bring back the rural areas and get people to want to live and sort of spread out a little bit, because part of the reason you're having to come closer is you don't want to commute 3 and 4 hours a day, right? It's just, it's a reality. It can be exhausting. And then the other side of it is we are starting to see some innovation where, in Germany, for example, we work with Deutsche Bahn and they put a Medibus. In Germany, they're in rural areas losing doctors, right? And so this was an attempt to put a doctor's office on a bus so a doctor can go around and bring the services too. So I think you also have to not just think about it as you moving or whatever. You may have to reinvent the services and how they're delivered to make sure that the people are taken care of.
So TJ, that being service specific there and like what the customer actually wants or needs out there is a really good point. So I used to live in a very rural area as well, and one of the actual first commercially successful examples of connected vehicles are irrigation for large farm fields and harvesting vehicles, because people figured out that if you use geolocation and connect it with a local area network of your vehicles, you can make sure you harvest more efficiently and more of your fields than just, hey, a team doing it by eye saying, okay, it looks like I've driven or harvested down these rows. If you bring GIS and connect your fleet of vehicles, it works better. So fast forward about 15 years of that technology, now a lot of farm vehicles are looking at automation. And it's not just the big, huge corporate farms. Like, these are massive efficiency increases and cost savings for smaller and mid-sized farms. And then as you were talking about the remote medical delivery, that's another great example, especially in rural areas of the US where the choice is, hey, I can drive and risk losing my license or risk getting in trouble because I'm not supposed to be driving to the doctor that's 40 miles away. Or we can use things like the Veterans Administration's pilot to bring the cool little robots with the iPads into your homes. Or less dramatically, just expand the reach of telemedicine and create secure streaming and teleconference capabilities out where traditionally there haven't been high bandwidth opportunities.
Yeah, that's all great. So TJ, you mentioned, you talked about this a little bit. We talked about the connected technology and how, but what do you see as far as innovative things that you've seen other than in the United States? What are some other new technologies that we may not be aware of that you could share with us on connectivity?
I think the LoRa-based sensors that are, so if you think of what a LoRa-based sensor, if you have Bluetooth on your phone where you might be able to talk over your phone hands-free from a car, so there's a different spectrum similar to Bluetooth called LoRa. And what it's affording is an opportunity for customers to do very inexpensive sensors that are not battery intensive. And so we're beginning to see customers deploy sensors in a more pervasive fashion. So whether it's around weather prediction, so for today, air quality, I'm sorry, I meant to say air quality, not weather prediction. Air quality is done in a singular, generally it's a unit, it looks like a shipping container, and it's one or two a town, and it's a limited sample. And now cities and governments are beginning to say, well, wait a minute, I can update this paradigm. I can put these pervasive sensors out across the whole state, across the whole city, across the whole country, island, whatever it happens to be, and I can get a better sampling of and a more realistic and accurate sampling of air quality. Well, air quality is killing upwards of 3 to 5 million people a year. And now you can start to put in, once you have the data and once you have a more accurate data, you can then begin to start to put in policies that say, hey, we need to do this. We need to make this change. And so that's something, I'm optimistic about the role technology can play. And sometimes it doesn't just have to be the sexy air taxi. It can be very practical issues that, trying to improve and extend lives and save lives.
Great. Big Cat, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so the other side of that is the approaches that we and you and all of us in the community are taking to take advantage of this data that we're taking in with all of these cool new sensors, right? So I love Maryland rockfish. I love grilling, you know, and one of the real issues facing the Chesapeake Bay and that, you know, just up the road, that area in general is that because of port activity and because of a lot of recreational sea vessel usage, rockfish are being threatened. So a consortium of folks, including AWS and some of the local organizations and some of the local universities, figured out that, hey, if we work with the Department of Transportation to move recreational lanes, you know, right, certain bits in the borders of the bay and in the borders of the Atlantic Ocean, we could create natural refuges for rockfish to go and spawn and survive. And that seems like a really, like I remember when I was reading the case study, I was like, man, that's super simple. That didn't even require like anyone important to do it. That was literally, you know, guys like me going out and saying, hey, move your boats a little bit. But it took a ton of analytical resources to get to the point where we're like, oh, we just need to affect about 2 nautical miles and then we're good to go. And then we can repair this whole ecosystem. Start to repair this whole ecosystem, you know, but that analytical effort wouldn't have been possible without all of this new transportation data that we had. Wow. Doing any kind of effort like that, even if we had the data, wouldn't have been possible without the computing power that's now available in the cloud. So like that's a pretty selfish example because basically I started out with, hey, I like this kind of fish and now this kind of fish is gonna survive. But I think it's a pretty good example of, hey, it's not just, you know, we need to find new ways of collecting data. We need to take advantage of the power and the services that we can now put to bear on our data.
Absolutely, that's great. I like rockfish too, so that's good.
Nice.
Well, you all come from large, very respected companies that have been in business for a while and very successful. How much interaction do you have with the federal government and that huge database that they have and use in open ways and then in, of course, secret ways? You know, we have a cyber command now. Nobody knows what they do other than we have a cyber command. So, but I don't want to get beyond probably the perimeters here, but it's pretty damn topical today to talk about that.
Hugh, I'm sorry, I can't tell you I know much about what Cyber Command is doing.
Nobody can.
Yeah, I have been in uniform for quite a while, but as far as the federal government, yeah, and specifically for transportation, the Department of Transportation's grants programs, on the state and local government side of AWS, we try to really help our Department of Transportation partners go out and really make effective proposals for these federal grants, right? So it's not just, hey, give us money, it's, hey, if you give us this quantifiable amount of money, we think we'll be able to give you these results based on these services and these analytical capabilities that we can have. So that's a lot of our interaction with the federal government on the AWS state and local government side.
We could talk about Cyber Command, but I think I have a pill I have to swallow after we talk.
Well, that's I did not have much success with talking with that group, but they're out there.
They are. Well, I think that's all. If we got questions from the audience, we've got time. If anyone has any questions for the panel, I think we've got people roaming with microphones. I was told that too, but we'll see how good.
Honestly, Eric, I can't see anything except the light, so I assume there's an audience out there. So.
Now there's an audience.
Oh, there we go. Now we can see.
Much better.
Anyone have any questions? All right.
I reckon not.
I reckon not. We did a good job.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh,
Question?
we got one up front. Got one up front. Get some exercise today.
Thank you. I wonder, given all of your respective positions, what you would advise the Department of Transportation to be doing, thinking about, and preparing for to best respond to, you know, our new connected world.
I can tell you the best number one thing that I have seen is actually quite simple. it's get started. It takes a while to build up the expertise to truly understand how to deal with this, right? And the states and communities that are leaning in have an unparalleled advantage in this competitive world that we're living in, right? Because it is also an economic competitive. So, and I'm marveled by the customers when they start down the journey and they get started and they start to learn. They know the issues, right? And they start to think about what is possible and the impact, right? That example of putting a crosswalk in then also led to an economic development opportunity. No one knew that before they got started, but getting started led to that, right? But it also built up expertise within the team to start to put a thought process together and build up that expertise, is because that expertise is earned. It's just not always readily available, and you need to have some of that homegrown talent. So simply getting started is probably the single most important thing I would say.
And TJ, would you say start small?
Yeah, have a clear driver, right? So in the early days of whatever this is, whether it's smart communities, connected vehicles, roads, whatever, there was this sort of rush to chase the bright, shiny object, right? And that has ended. And thankfully, and where we're at now is people are really focused on what's a problem that I have to solve, right? So, a customer in Tennessee said, "Hey, I've got a fog problem. I have in the mountains, I have people that die, and I have sensors, and the data takes too long to get back." So, what they wanted to improve was. It started with they wanted to improve at how they got real-time data to improve safety, right? And so they had a clear structure, clear KPIs, and then once that foundational opportunity was there, scoped, success, you can expand upon it, right? So absolutely, have a clear driver, with clear KPIs and a clear scope in the beginning. If you want to go for all of it. Great, no, it's almost impossible, right? I mean, being practical, you could be talking about thousands and thousands of miles. It takes a long time physically to get to that.
Okay.
You kind of stole my answer there, but yeah, I fully agree with TJ. Like, you guys are going to know what your constituents want from you, and those are absolutely the things that you focus on. But I will tell you also to keep in mind, one of the basic building blocks of any system, have that plan for backup and disaster recovery, in your head, in your scope before you go out and build cool things. Because, especially in a place like this, I mean, you guys know natural disasters down here. So, like, a place like this, you build this amazing new system and it gets wiped out in a day. That's a terrible thing. So.
I didn't pay him to say that either, but thank you for saying about DR. Okay. DR is very important. Any more questions? Got one up here.
In a few years, when I get a subscription to an automated vehicle service, I'm going to be very vulnerable to them. They're going to know everything about me, where I go, when I go, where I stop, who I'm with, etc. Will I be able to opt out, get them to not bombard me with advertising or not sell my needs and wants to third parties? And if I can opt out, will that be very expensive to do so?
I don't have a crystal ball, and those are not the business models. We have customers that probably do that or are thinking about that. I might turn around on you and say, well, what if the service were free? Would you be willing to be scanned while you're in the car, have your blood pressure checked or your heart monitored, and your transportation in the future is free? The reason I ask that question is there are companies actually thinking about a radically new paradigm and saying, look, would you be willing to give a little more medical data, so they could try it? And the answer is I'm not sure, but I think what we're definitely seeing that I referred to earlier, and you saw recently the regulation in California is probably the first one in the U.S., you have GDPR over in Europe. You're seeing clear movement at a government level around privacy and regulation, and I'm very encouraged. And how that will be down to your specific question, I simply can't answer, but I'm certainly encouraged because your question's a practical one. We're all in this together, and I think we just want a rational approach to that and how that'll be. But I'm not sure where exactly it's going to go.
Find a good attorney. And to TJ's point, it's very difficult to see, where each of these, because there's a lot of new startups that are coming out, and they're very aggressive. And to your point, we don't really know, but it's always, as we always say, read, define, print. And make sure before you click on, I'll accept that service. Make sure you understand what you're accepting.
It's a good question, though.
Yeah, it's a good question. Any further? Got one?
It's me. Question. Here's a conversation that Department of Transportation is really having, and Secretary Trogdon is very taken as a priority. And it's basically how autonomous vehicle may impact state revenues. What does that mean? That means that we're going to see impacts on everything from gas taxes and registration fees and sales taxes on vehicles that's purchased with gas. So that is going to bring us to gas taxes in the way that we see in North Carolina. From your professional expertise, how would you help North Carolina as we move towards those impacts to help us to develop strategies, and what type of information do you think you could help us provide from the Department of Transportation?
I mean, what we're seeing is, so this is not our space, but I would say is, it does appear that vehicle miles traveled is going to be the way. It may not be the way, but it's certainly right now the leading way. So it's instead of your gas tax, which is a declining revenue base everywhere, and leading to shortfalls in transportation budgets across the world, or certainly in the U.S. There's the potential that they can start to track the miles, and then there are a couple of different ways that they could potentially do it, and then that gets really into a privacy conversation. But whether it's vehicle miles traveled or it's something else, clearly there will be a new model, but it hasn't emerged as to what that final model is. The reality is infrastructure needs to be built and it needs to be paid for. So we've done it in the past. We'll do it maybe in some new form in the future. There will be some transition. There will be some folks that are very happy because their bills are going to go down. There are going to be some folks that aren't. And I think, I'm, again, not only optimistic on the technology, I'm optimistic on government, and having worked with it for so many years, our leaders will come up with a policy that will be equitable as well.
Another question.
From a security standpoint, I know you're saying that we don't have to worry about somebody getting into the system, but if I'm riding around in a drone or in a backseat of a autonomous vehicle, how am I assured that somebody's not going to get in? And if they do get into the system, what am I going to do sitting back there or flying up there watching all this happen?
Sure. So I think you're referring to when I mentioned the shared responsibility model. So as a cloud service provider, I take care of the security, both physical and digital, of all of the infrastructure below the virtualization layer, right? And then whoever the developer or system manager is hanging his or her stuff in the infrastructure, they're responsible for the security of that actual system, right? But holistically working together with folks like Eric, one, there's a regulatory component to that, and trying to kind of predict what are the dangerous areas and how do we mitigate that. But then two, there's a constant requirement to focus on security. So like on our side, security is our #1 priority. We have a world-class team of folks all over the world working 24/7 to make sure that AWS regions, AWS availability zones are secure, and we shut everything down if we feel that something's not where it's supposed to be. And then the folks that you're going to work with, to build the stuff on us, that's the kind of confidence they're going to have to give you before, you know, your state is going to allow that to go forward.
I might just add, look, any adoption of any technology comes with confidence of the consumer, and until the industry answers that satisfactorily, that concern will linger. They are working across standards bodies to come up and address that issue, and it's a work in progress, right? But clearly, in order for us, as we go through any new technology, one of the big buckets is confidence of the consumer, and that issue has not been fully addressed. There are standards bodies that do address it, but look, we need probably a little more time, and that's why you should be encouraged that when it comes to sort of self-driving cars, there's a range, right? From 1 to 5, there's no fully autonomous car on the road today, and part of that is the industry has to answer to that, and they're keenly aware of that, because you're not going to buy a service that you don't feel confident in. So you should be encouraged that they are taking it quite seriously as an automotive industry.
And honestly, it's about folks like you in a summit like this, like asking the question of a bunch of corporate guys and the state CIO, right? I mean, that's what's going to keep everything on the up and up.
That was a great question. One more.
I'd like to follow back up on the urban versus rural discussion a little bit. I'm from a rural community that still struggles with adequate connectivity and broadband. It's almost as good as dial-up still where I'm from. So how do you, when you're talking about, well, maybe these services will be brought to those communities and it will result in more people moving into rural areas, how does that work? How do you marry those two very extreme situations where in urban areas you have all kinds of innovations happening, at such a pace, and then you have rural communities that don't even have the infrastructure to support those kinds of innovations?
And I'll take that. I think it goes, we have to partner better. We're learning, I know our agency, we created great grant programs. So we've started out with $10 million in our first budget session. We're at 15 each year in the next 2 years to expand the broadband. But we're also, that's a small amount of dollars. So what do we do with that? We also reach out to communities. We have a broadband infrastructure office that actually goes out and works with communities and states, okay, what helps them plan, so that when they're ready for a grant proposal, they're there, they can apply, they can help them apply. Working with USDA on grant, we've got 2 large grant proposals that have been awarded here in North Carolina. Proud of that work too. So it's a partnership of looking at our state as a whole and how do we accomplish that. Mapping is very important. Having our citizens input data to the maps that we understand where are the areas that are not connected so that we can move these technologies to those areas. But that is a great question. We get that a lot. We're trying to work with communities as much as we can, and dollars is important, and we continue to ask for more money. But that is it's a very hot topic in a lot of our rural areas. But the partnerships with our telecoms are very important too, because they understand that there is a void, and they're trying to fill that void too. So we're trying to figure out all those mixed together and what does that plan look like. But the communities can help by, doing surveys. There's a lot of things they can do to help out that prepare so that when you have the opportunity to apply for grants and such, they're ready and you don't have to wait. I hope that helped a little bit. Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to follow on with my colleague's question behind me in terms of something very concrete. And I'm from Craven County. It's a very rural area. We have kids who are told to go to McDonald's to do their homework because they can connect to a Wi-Fi.
Yeah, homework.
Okay, but it's not just can we get to the 21st century. You're not going to get any viable economic development in your rural areas unless you have got a very vibrant, I will call it an IT system, fiber system, whatever. No connectivity means nobody's going to come build anything there that produces the jobs. So, and this is a comment, it is not a question. we hear their surveys, their grants, their whatever, but if you're in a rural area and you don't have any of this stuff, very frankly, you need somebody to come in and say, here's how we're going to fix it. Because you don't know how to fix it because you don't know what you don't have with it. And I think it's critical not for 2050, it's for 2020 economic development of North Carolina. And I think it's critical when you get out of the center of the state. So thank you.
Totally agree. Good point. Yep, very good point. We got a question over here.
I'm also from a rural area. And how soon do you think we're going to move beyond broadband and go to satellite-based internet connections and communications?
Sure.
Not my area. Yeah, I can tell you that we're in conversations with other states around that. How do we look at a consortium? One of the things that we looked at was DISA. The federal government actually has a program that we looked at. The problem we had was their speeds. We want to make sure the speeds we provide are better than what you're having today. So that opportunity is there. You know, when you see a private individual launch 33 satellites, there's a reason why, we feel like. So we're having conversations with SpaceX. There's a lot of different conversations we're having to try to see what does that look like. So we're not only looking just at fiber in the ground, we are looking at that as well. I can't give you a date on that, but I can tell you, I think it's a lot closer than it ever has been. The speeds is really what, you know, that's what we got to look at.
It's good having you on this panel. You get some good questions, get some good answers.
Other questions? Got one?
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary.
Hey, Steve.
If I had to get back to a Morrisville City Council meeting today at 6, if I don't leave in 15 minutes, I won't get there till 6:30. So the biggest problem that we're having in the Triangle is congestion. It's getting worse. My question is, when I go back to my colleagues on the council, where are some of the best places I can begin with smart city technology to address traffic congestion? Is it connected intersections? Is it better sensors that we can use to look at real-time traffic patterns? So even when we're looking at planning and we approve a development, we know better how it's going to impact traffic. So just, you know, the biggest challenge for a lot of us is, right now I'm leading our smart city initiatives in Morrisville, but where do we get started in an area like traffic? Because the citizens, 90% of our citizens, and many of you who drive through Morrisville have said that traffic is the #1 problem, that you never want to set up a meeting there at 6 or at 8 in the morning, or you know. So could you address that, please?
I mean, look, the #1 thing that people are doing, big or small cities, when this issue comes up, is step one is connecting up their traffic lights, taking them